The crimson slick stained the polished durasteel floor, a stark contrast against the clinical gleam of the Zenith Citadel's training bay. Kaelen Vance, spitting a mouthful of coppery blood, stared up at Kryll. The purple-skinned instructor, all 6 limbs flexing within segmented armor that shimmered like polished amethyst, loomed over him. Kryll's mandibles clicked with a rhythm. Kaelen was rapidly coming to associate with something akin to predatory glee. "You are bleeding, human." Kryll's voice, a low rumble, vibrated through the floor. Kaelen wiped his nose with the back of a hand, leaving a scarlet smear across his knuckles. The pain was a familiar companion, a sharp throb echoing countless Foreman fights and bar brawls back on Terra. "Yeah, I noticed." The other recruits, a dozen species from across the galaxy, each supposedly the pinnacle of their world's warriors, shifted uneasily. Most looked like they were re-evaluating every life choice that had led them to Xylos. A few seemed to be actively calculating the safest distance from a human. Kaelen didn't blame them. The last 3 recruits to face Kryll's orientation exercise had been carried out on grav stretchers. One, a crystalline being from the outer rim, still emitted faint, distressful chiming. Kryll's head, studded with multiple iridescent eyes, tilted at an angle that would have fractured a human neck, studying Kaelen like a particularly intriguing biological anomaly. Curious. Most species exhibit significant distress when experiencing cranial trauma. They request immediate medical attention. They file formal complaints with the Academy Ethics Board. His lower arms gestured dismissively toward a stack of data logs on a nearby plinth. "I have processed 47 withdrawal requests since this morning session commenced." "Good for them," Kaelen said, pushing himself to his feet with an effort he refused to let show. Blood continued to leak from his nose, a steady drip, and something in his left shoulder grated ominously. But he'd endured worse. "Are we done here? Or did you want to try for something more interesting?" The silence in the training bay was absolute, thick enough to suffocate. It wasn't merely quiet, it was the kind of dead stillness that fell when everyone realized they were witnessing something teetering on the edge of legend or catastrophe. CTA, Kaelen's sheer will shone through, captivating everyone. If you're on the edge of your seat like us, hit that like button and subscribe now. Don't miss a single moment of this epic saga as humanity redefines its place in the galaxy. And tell us in the comments, what do you think Kaelen's greatest strength is? Kryll's 4 primary eyes, each the size of a human fist and glowing with an inner violet light suggesting integrated targeting systems, focused on Kaelen with predatory intensity. Around the room, the other instructors froze. There was Drill Sergeant Xylos, a lime-green reptilian from the war-torn Perseus arm, whose idea of encouragement involved live plasma rounds. Beside him stood Commander Vorlag, whose insectoid species had driven every other apex predator on their home world extinct before achieving interstellar flight. In the furthest shadow, lurking almost invisibly, was a multi-jointed entity. Kaelen's briefing materials simply labeled Instructor Unit 7 Alpha, with a chilling footnote advising against further inquiry. All of them stared at Kaelen as if he'd just announced his intention to juggle volatile antimatter. "More interesting," Kryll repeated, each word precisely enunciated, tasting them with his segmented mandibles. "Well, yeah." Kaelen shrugged, wincing as the movement sent fresh spikes of pain through his shoulder. "I mean, you hit like my kid sister. And she's 12. Kryll's mandibles ceased clicking. In the sudden vacuum of sound, Kaelen could hear his own heart hammering, the faint hum of the training bay's environmental systems, and what sounded suspiciously like someone in the observation deck above choking on their synth drink. "Your sister," Kryll stated carefully, "is 12 of your Terra years. Give or take a few months. And she strikes you with greater force than I just demonstrated. She's got a wicked right hook." Kaelen grinned, blood staining his teeth in what he hoped was an intimidating fashion. "Plus, she fights dirty. Last time she caught me off guard during one of our wrestling matches, I had to explain to my mom why there were teeth marks on my ankle and scratches down my back. Kid's got claws." The room had transitioned from silent to an even deeper, more profound quiet. Even the environmental system seemed to have muted its hum, as if the Citadel's AI was holding its breath. From the observation deck came the frantic click-clack of data terminals, followed by urgent, hushed conversations in at least 6 different galactic languages. Kaelen caught fragments: human family dynamics, childhood combat conditioning. Review species classification files immediately. Instructor Kryll. A voice from above, high-pitched with what might have been panic, pierced the stillness. Kaelen looked up to see a tall, slender, blue-skinned alien, Lyra, the Administrative Coordinator, leaning precariously over the railing, her too many jointed arms waving. Perhaps we should consult the... No. Kryll's voice cut through the air like a vibroblade through flesh. The human wishes for something more interesting. You shall have it. The next 47 minutes redefined Kaelen's understanding of physical pain. Kryll didn't just hit harder, he hit smarter. Each strike was calculated for maximum impact with minimum permanent damage. A surgical application of violence that left Kaelen wondering if the instructor had spent time studying human anatomy specifically for this purpose. Which, as it turned out, he absolutely had. Your species is remarkably durable, Kryll observed clinically, pausing to examine a readout on his wrist display, while Kaelen struggled to remember how breathing was supposed to work. His chest felt like someone had parked a grav tank on it, and his vision was doing interesting things around the edges. Cardiovascular efficiency remains within acceptable parameters despite significant trauma. Pain response is present but manageable. Bone density exceeds projections by 37%. Fascinating. Kaelen spat blood onto the training mat. It was getting difficult to distinguish his blood from the previous recruits. He managed to get his feet under him again. His legs felt like they were made of rubber and bad decisions. But he was still upright, still conscious, still thoroughly aggravated. Is that your professional opinion, Doc? I am not a medical practitioner, Kryll replied, consulting his display again. I am an instrument of conditioning. My function is to determine the precise threshold at which each species breaks, then calibrate training protocols accordingly. His mandibles resumed their clicking, a sound like dice in a cup. Though I confess, your reactions are unprecedented. Typically, subjects at this stage of the conditioning process exhibit one of 3 responses: unconsciousness, complete psychological breakdown, or voluntary withdrawal from the program. Kryll's head tilted again, studying Kaelen like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. You appear to be experiencing none of these states. Your stress hormones are elevated but stable. Your neural activity suggests controlled aggression rather than panic. Most intriguingly, your pain responses seem to be triggering what our sensors are reading as anticipation. Kaelen wiped blood from his mouth and grinned. It wasn't a pleasant grin. It was the kind that had gotten him ejected from 3 different establishments and banned from his nephew's youth league games. Maybe you're not trying hard enough. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Heavier, more expectant, like the moment before a grav storm when the air itself seemed to hold its breath. From the observation deck, Kaelen heard someone whisper what sounded like a prayer in a language that made his ears ache. Another voice responded with what might have been cursing, or possibly just complex statistical analysis. It was hard to tell with alien languages. Sir, a tentative voice from one of the junior instructors drifted down. Perhaps we should review the human psychological profile again. The baseline readings might be... The readings are accurate, Kryll stated, without taking his eyes off Kaelen. I personally supervised the testing protocols. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, yet it filled the entire training bay. Which means we were dealing with something unexpected. Kaelen flexed his hands, working feeling back into his fingers. His left wrist made concerning popping sounds, and he was pretty sure something in his right shoulder had separated, but pain was just pain. He'd learned that lesson courtesy of 12 years in construction, where showing weakness meant losing respect, losing work, and eventually losing the ability to support your family. Besides, he was curious now. How far could he push this? "So what's next?" he asked. "More punching? Kicking? Maybe you've got some kind of alien torture device you've been saving for special occasions." Kryll straightened to his full height, nearly 8 feet of armored muscle and predatory focus. Something in his posture shifted. The clinical detachment was gone, replaced by something that made the hair on Kaelen's arms stand on end and his primal instincts scream warnings about apex predators. "Human Vance," he said quietly, and there was something in his tone that suggested Kaelen had just crossed a line he hadn't known existed. "I believe you may be correct about my methods being insufficient." The atmosphere in the room changed as if someone had flipped a switch. The other instructors stepped back, giving Kryll more space. Several of the remaining recruits made sounds Kaelen's universal translator couldn't parse, but which definitely conveyed the sentiment of "Oh Synth-Dome, we're all going to die." From the observation deck came the sound of chairs scraping back as officials stood up for a better view, or possibly to run. Kaelen wasn't entirely sure which. However, Kryll continued, his forearms beginning to move in slow, hypnotic patterns that Kaelen's eyes wanted to follow despite his better judgment. "I must warn you that what comes next operates under different parameters than the standard conditioning protocols." "Different how?" "The standard protocols are designed to test limits without causing permanent damage. What you are requesting," Kryll's mandibles spread wide in what Kaelen was beginning to suspect wasn't actually a smile. "That falls under combat assessment." Kaelen felt his heart rate spike, but not with fear. With excitement. And that's different because combat assessment assumes the subject is an enemy combatant rather than a trainee. The safety restrictions are significantly reduced. Around the room, Kaelen became aware that everyone was staring at him with expressions ranging from fascination to outright horror. Even Instructor Unit 7 Alpha had emerged further from the shadows, revealing what appeared to be a cross between a praying mantis and a nightmare, watching the proceedings with an interest that felt distinctly predatory. "Your choice, Human Vance," Kryll said formally. "We can conclude today's session now, with your performance noted as exceptional for a Day 1 conditioning exercise." Or, he paused, letting the word hang in the air like a challenge. "We can proceed to combat assessment, with all that entails." Kaelen looked around the room, taking in the alien faces watching him. Some were curious, some were concerned. A few looked like they were already calculating the odds of his survival. But none of them looked like they thought he could win. That decided it. "Let's do this," Kaelen said, and meant it. The next part happened fast. Kryll moved like liquid lightning, all 4 arms striking simultaneously in a coordinated attack pattern that would have liquefied most carbon-based life forms. Kaelen saw it coming, barely, and realized with crystal clarity that he had approximately 0 chance of blocking or dodging what was essentially a 4-armed hurricane of precisely applied violence. So he did something that definitely wasn't in any military manual, alien or otherwise. Instead of trying to get away from the attack, he stepped into it. Kaelen lunged forward, inside the arc of Kryll's strikes, and drove his elbow up into the soft joint between the instructor's chest plates. It was a move his high school wrestling coach had taught him during an unofficial lesson behind the gym. Not legal in competition, but devastatingly effective in a real fight where rules were more like suggestions. The impact sent shockwaves through both of them. Kryll's coordination faltered as unexpected pain disrupted his nervous system, his strikes going wide and catching only air. Kaelen pressed his advantage, pivoting to wrap his arm around the instructor's throat in a chokehold that definitely wasn't covered in the Academy's official combat manual. For about 3 glorious seconds, Kaelen thought he might actually have a chance. Then, Kryll's segmented armor began to heat up. The burning started at Kaelen's forearm, where it pressed against the instructor's neck and spread rapidly up his arm like wildfire through dry grass. It felt like hugging a blast furnace, and the smell of singed hair and cooking flesh filled his nostrils. His skin began to blister almost immediately, the pain so intense it made his earlier beating feel like a gentle massage. He held on anyway. "Remarkable," Kryll wheezed. apparently unconcerned by the fact that he was being strangled by a species he'd previously dismissed as moderately durable agricultural workers. Pain tolerance exceeds all projections by significant margins. Tactical adaptability suggests combat experience despite stated civilian background. Thanks. Kaelen gritted through clenched teeth, his vision starting to go red around the edges. I try to stay in shape. This will not end well for you, Human Vance. Probably not. You could surrender. Request medical attention. File a formal complaint. Kaelen's grip tightened fractionally, even as the burning sensation spread up to his shoulder. Could you? KRWL's laugh was like the sound of grinding metal mixed with breaking glass, but there was something almost appreciative in it. Excellent. I was beginning to think your species might be disappointing. The instructor's lower arms reached up with deliberate slowness, found purchase on Kaelen's wrists, and began to apply pressure. Not quickly. KRYLL seemed to be savoring the moment, testing exactly how much force it would take to break human bones. The pressure built gradually, methodically, like a machine designed specifically for the purpose of discovering structural failure points. Kaelen felt his left wrist begin to give first, the bones grinding against each other in ways that definitely weren't anatomically correct. The pain was extraordinary, a white-hot spike that shot up his arm and exploded behind his eyes like a flashbang grenade. But he'd felt pain before. Hell, he'd felt worse pain than this when he dislocated his shoulder senior year and kept playing football for another quarter because the team needed him. So instead of letting go, he did something that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He bit KRYLL's neck. Not a nibble. Not a warning nip. A full-on, predator-style bite that would have done a rabid Wolverine proud, complete with grinding teeth and what his little sister would have recognized as Kaelen's "I'm not letting go until something breaks" expression. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. KRWL's exoskeleton flared to temperatures that would have killed most known species instantly, hot enough that Kaelen's saliva sizzled and evaporated on contact. His mandibles spread wide in what Kaelen assumed was either surprise, rage, or possibly both. Every instructor in the room suddenly found themselves very interested in their clipboards, data logs, or the fascinating patterns on the ceiling. And Kaelen held on, even as his mouth filled with the taste of superheated alien ichor and his lips began to blister. Fascinating, someone said from the observation deck, their voice carrying the kind of clinical detachment that suggested they were taking notes. The human appears to be entering a state of controlled berserker rage. Note the pupil dilation, the elevated skin temperature, the complete disregard for self-preservation. Is that normal behavior for the species? Came another voice, higher-pitched with what might have been concern. Unknown. We have insufficient baseline data on human combat psychology. The files from Terra were incomplete. How incomplete? They listed humans as generally peaceful, agricultural species with limited combat applications. I'm beginning to suspect that assessment may have been inaccurate. Kaelen couldn't hear the rest of the conversation over the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears and the interesting crackling noises his skin was making as it cooked. His vision had narrowed to a tunnel, his world reduced to the simple equation of grip strength versus pain tolerance. Everything else, the watching aliens, the burning agony in his arms, the growing numbness in his left hand, the metallic taste of alien blood in his mouth, faded to background noise. He was going to win this thing or die trying. At this point, he wasn't particularly concerned about which outcome occurred first. Then KRYLL did something that changed everything. He stopped fighting back. Enough, the instructor said quietly, and the word cut through Kaelen's tunnel vision like a knife through fog. Release me, Human Vance. Kaelen's grip loosened slightly, confusion replacing rage as his higher brain functions came back online. What? I said, release me. The combat assessment is complete. Slowly, reluctantly, Kaelen let his arms fall to his sides. He swayed slightly as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a body that was discovering new and creative ways to hurt. His left arm, from elbow to fingertips, Looked like he'd stuck it in a pizza oven, and the taste in his mouth suggested he'd been chewing on batteries. Kryll stepped back, his forehands probing gingerly at the bite marks on his neck. When he looked at Kaelen again, there was something different in his expression, something that might have been respect, or possibly just professional curiosity about how Kaelen was still standing. "Congratulations, Human Vance," he said formally, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent training bay. "You have successfully completed Day 1 Extreme Conditioning Protocols." Kaelen blinked, trying to process what he'd just heard. "That's it? I didn't win." "You survived." Kryll's mandibles resumed their clicking, but now it sounded almost approving. "Against a Kryllian combat instructor using full combat assessment protocols, you maintained consciousness, retained aggressive capability, demonstrated tactical adaptability, and inflicted actual damage." He paused, consulting his wrist display again. "According to my records, this has never happened before in the entire history of the Citadel." Around the room, Kaelen became aware that the other instructors were staring at him with expressions ranging from fascination to mild horror. The few recruits who hadn't washed out were giving him a wide berth, as if he might be contagious or possibly radioactive. "So what happens now?" Kaelen asked, wiping alien ichor from his mouth with his less burned hand. "Now," Kryll said, "you report to Medical Bay for damage assessment and tissue regeneration. The burns will heal within 6 hours using standard treatment protocols. Then you return to your quarters for rest cycle." He paused, and Kaelen could swear he heard something like anticipation in the instructor's voice. "Tomorrow, we begin Day 2 conditioning. Will it be harder?" Kryll's laugh was like grinding metal, but there was something almost fond in it now, something that suggested Kaelen had earned a different kind of attention than the usual trainee. "Human Vance, after today's performance, I believe we will need to significantly revise our training protocols. The standard curriculum appears to be insufficient for your species." Kaelen's resilience didn't just break records, it shattered entire training philosophies. What are your thoughts on humanity's raw potential? Leave a comment below and share your awe. And make sure to subscribe for more incredible feats. As Kaelen walked toward the medical bay, trying not to limp and mostly failing, he heard one of the instructors mutter something in a language his translator couldn't parse. But he caught the tone, and he definitely heard his name mentioned along with what sounded like statistical calculations and possibly some creative profanity. Behind him, he could hear Kryll addressing the remaining recruits. "Let this be a lesson to you all. The galaxy is full of species you have not encountered, worlds you cannot imagine, and capabilities that exist beyond your current understanding. Today, we learned that even the most comprehensive databases can be incomplete." From the observation deck came the sound of frantic activity, data terminals chiming, communication channels opening, and what sounded like several very urgent conversations happening simultaneously. Kaelen smiled as the medical bay doors slid shut behind him. His nose was definitely broken. His left arm looked like a piece of well-done barbecue, and something in his shoulder was making noises that probably required professional attention. But for the first time since arriving at the Citadel, Kaelen Vance was smiling without any blood in his teeth. This was going to be fun. Kaelen Vance woke at 0500 hours feeling like he'd been hit by a freight train carrying a cargo of smaller, angrier freight trains, which, considering yesterday's events, wasn't far from the truth. The medical bay's regeneration protocols had worked exactly as advertised. His burns had healed to pink, tender skin, his broken nose had been reset and reinforced, and something had been done to his shoulder that involved a lot of concerned chittering from the medical staff. But the human body, as it turned out, kept score of trauma in ways that alien medicine couldn't quite account for. Every muscle ached, every joint protested movement, and when he tried to sit up, his back informed him in no uncertain terms that perhaps lying down for the rest of his natural life might be a viable career option. Kaelen sat up anyway. The other recruits in the dormitory were already moving through their morning routines, or what passed for morning routines when half the species present didn't actually sleep in any recognizable sense. The crystalline being from yesterday's carnage was still emitting soft chiming sounds that might have been crying or possibly just natural resonance. A six-legged, lime-green reptilian creature Kaelen hadn't been formally introduced to was doing something that looked like yoga, but involved way more spinal flexibility than any vertebrate had a right to possess. None of them made eye contact with Kaelen. "Human Vance," came a voice from the dormitory entrance. Kaelen looked up to see Lyra, the tall, slender, blue-skinned alien, the same one who'd tried to intervene yesterday. Up close, Kaelen could see that her features were almost ethereally beautiful, like someone had decided to design a person based on the concept of a concerned librarian from space, with a body that flowed with graceful curves. "That's me," Kaelen said, pulling on his training uniform. Everything still hurt, but it was a manageable hurt, the kind of pain that reminded you that you were still alive and capable of making poor decisions. "I'm Administrative Coordinator Lyra," the alien said, her voice carrying a melodic quality Kaelen's translator rendered as vaguely feminine. "I've been tasked with conducting your psychological evaluation before today's conditioning session." Psychological evaluation? Standard protocol when a trainee exhibits unusual responses to stress conditioning. Lyra consulted a data log with the sort of concentrated attention that suggested she was reading very interesting information. "Your performance yesterday has raised certain questions regarding human psychological baselines." Kaelen finished pulling on his boots and stood up. Around the dormitory, the other recruits were pretending very hard not to listen to the conversation. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that typically result in species reclassification," Lyra said quietly. "Please follow me." The psychological evaluation room was exactly what Kaelen had expected from an alien military academy. Sterile, uncomfortable, and equipped with entirely too many sensors for what was supposed to be a simple conversation. Lyra gestured to a chair that had clearly been designed for someone with a different skeletal structure, then settled herself across from him with the data log balanced on her knees. "I will be conducting a standard psychological assessment," she began, stylus poised over the data log surface. "Please answer all questions honestly and completely." "Shoot," Kaelen blinked. "I will not be discharging any weapons during this evaluation." "It's an expression," Kaelen explained. "It means go ahead." Lyra made a note on her data log. Human colloquial language includes metaphorical references to violence in casual conversation. Noted. She looked up at him with eyes that were entirely too large and entirely too intelligent. Question 1. How would you describe your emotional state following yesterday's conditioning session? "Fine. Fine, yeah. Sore but fine." More notes. Question 2. Do you experience any lingering psychological effects from the trauma you sustained? Nightmares? Flashbacks? Intrusive thoughts? Kaelen considered this. He dreamed about the fight, but they hadn't been nightmares. More like action movies where he got to be the hero, which probably wasn't the answer Lyra was looking for. No psychological effects. Question 3. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the maximum possible distress, how would you rate your current anxiety levels regarding today's conditioning session? Kaelen thought about it. Was he anxious? He was curious about what they'd throw at him next. Maybe a little excited. But anxious? Maybe a 2. Lyra's stylus stopped moving. A 2. Well, I'm wondering if they've got anything more challenging lined up, but anxious? Not really. The silence stretched long enough for Kaelen to wonder if he'd broken something. Finally, Lyra set down her stylus and looked at him with an expression that suggested she was seeing him for the first time. "Human Vance," she said carefully, "are you aware that yesterday's conditioning session would have killed approximately 97% of known sentient species?" "Seemed rough," Kaelen admitted, "but I've had worse." "You have had worse than combat-grade conditioning protocols administered by a Kryllian battle instructor." Lyra made several rapid notes, then looked up again. "I think we need to discuss your species' definition of normal." 20 minutes later, Kaelen found himself back in the training bay. But this time the setup was different. Instead of the open floor where yesterday's festivities had occurred, the space had been reconfigured into something that looked like a cross between an obstacle course and a medieval torture chamber. KRYLL stood in the center of it all, his forearms crossed in what Kaelen was learning to recognize as his thinking pose. Around him, a dozen other instructors were consulting data logs, adjusting equipment, and generally giving off the impression of people who were making things up as they went along. "Ah, human Vance," Kaelen said without turning around. "Prompt arrival. Excellent. We have prepared something special for your day 2 conditioning." Kaelen looked around the modified training bay. There were spinning blades, electrified walls, what appeared to be a pit full of something that was moving in ways that liquid probably shouldn't, and in the corner, a device that looked like it had been designed by someone with strong opinions about creative applications of gravity. "Looks fun," Kaelen said, and meant it. Indeed, Kaelen finally turned to face him, and Kaelen noticed that the bite marks on the instructor's neck were still visible, despite what must have been some impressive medical attention. "However, we have encountered a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where our standard conditioning protocols appear to be inadequate for your species' physiology and psychology." Kaelen gestured to the obstacle course with all 4 arms. This equipment was designed to test the limits of the galaxy's most resilient species. According to our calculations, it should provide appropriate challenge for someone who survived yesterday's assessment. Kaelen studied the course more carefully. The spinning blades were moving fast enough to liquefy anything that got too close. The electrified walls were crackling with enough energy to power a small city, and the gravity device was causing visible distortions in the air around it. "Looks appropriately challenging," he said. "Yes," Kaelen agreed. "However, Administrative Coordinator Lyra has raised concerns about our understanding of human psychological baselines." From across the training bay, Kaelen could see Lyra standing with a group of other officials, all of them consulting data logs and having what looked like very intense conversations. Every few seconds, one of them would glance in his direction with an expression that suggested they were trying to solve a particularly complex equation. "What kind of concerns?" "The kind where we're beginning to suspect that what humans consider normal conditioning might constitute what other species would classify as enhanced interrogation techniques." Kalen's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Tell me, human Vance, what is your homeworld standard method for training military personnel?" Kaelen thought about his brief stint in the Terra Defense Force Reserves before he'd gotten into construction. "Boot camp mostly. Lots of running, push-ups, obstacle courses, drill sergeants yelling at you, sleep deprivation. That kind of thing. And this is considered normal? Pretty standard. What about specialized forces? Your elite military units? Oh, that stuff gets way more intense. Recon training, for instance. They've got Hell Week, where you basically don't sleep for 5 days straight while doing constant physical challenges. Plus cold water conditioning, underwater exercises, combat simulations." Kaelen paused, thinking. "Actually, some of the stories I've heard about advanced training make yesterday look pretty tame." The clicking of Kalen's mandibles stopped entirely. From the observation deck came the sound of several data logs hitting the floor simultaneously. "Human Vance," Kaelen said slowly. "Are you informing me that your species voluntarily subjects itself to conditioning regimens that exceed galactic military standards?" "Well, yeah. How else would you prepare people for combat? Most species rely on technological augmentation, pharmaceutical enhancement, or cybernetic integration." Kaelen consulted his wrist display again. "The concept of voluntary physical conditioning to the point of actual physiological breakdown is unchecked." "Huh." Kaelen considered this. "So what do other species do when they need their military personnel to be tough? They select species that are naturally tough and train them minimally. Or they select species that are naturally intelligent and provide them with advanced equipment." Kaelen paused. "Your species appears to have taken the approach of making yourselves tough through deliberate application of control trauma." "Yeah, that sounds about right." More silence. Kaelen was beginning to think that silence was the default response to most things he said around here. "This presents a dilemma," Kaelen finally continued. "Our conditioning protocols are designed to identify breaking points, not to accommodate species that actively seek out their breaking points for recreational purposes." "So what's the plan?" KRWLL's laugh had the same metallic quality as yesterday, but now there was something else in it, something that might have been professional excitement. The plan, Human Vance, is to determine exactly how far your species' conditioning tolerance extends. He gestured to the obstacle course again. This equipment represents the absolute maximum stress load our facilities can generate. If you can't complete it successfully, we will need to improvise. Kaelen looked at the course again. The spinning blades were hypnotic in their precision. The electrified walls cast dancing shadows across the floor. The gravity device was making his inner ear do uncomfortable things just from standing 20 feet away. It looked like the kind of challenge that would either kill him or teach him something important about himself. When do we start? Immediately. KRYLL raised one arm, and suddenly every instructor in the bay was paying attention. All personnel to observation positions. Medical teams on standby. Begin recording for Academy records. Kaelen walked to the starting line, feeling that familiar pre-game excitement building in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd gotten before football games, before difficult construction jobs, before that bar fight outside Lansing that had ended with him and 3 other guys becoming unlikely friends. The feeling that said, this is going to hurt, but it's going to be worth it. Human Vance, KRYLL called out. Are you prepared to begin? Ready when you are. Excellent. One final note. If at any point you wish to withdraw from the exercise, simply call out extraction, and we will immediately halt the course and provide medical assistance. Kaelen grinned. Thanks, but I won't need it. We shall see. Begin in 3, 2, 1. Mark. Kaelen launched himself forward into the spinning maze of blades like he was diving into a swimming pool full of very sharp, very fast-moving water. If their agricultural workers can complete our maximum conditioning protocols, he paused, and Kaelen could hear the smile in his voice even without looking back. Perhaps we should be asking what their actual warriors are capable of. Behind him, the sound of frantic typing on data terminals filled the air, punctuated by urgent communications to what sounded like very high-ranking officials. Kaelen smiled as the medical bay doors closed behind him. Day 3 was going to be interesting. Kaelen Vance woke up on day 3 to find a security detail standing beside his bed. Not threatening him. Exactly, more like studying him the way a scientist might study a particularly interesting specimen that had just done something unprecedented and possibly dangerous. Human Vance, said the lead figure, a tall, imposing orange-skinned alien with crystalline skin that refracted the dormitory's lighting into prismatic patterns. I am Security Chief Zyler. You will accompany us for enhanced assessment protocols. Kaelen sat up slowly, noting that his usual post-conditioning aches and pains from yesterday had already faded to barely noticeable twinges. The alien medical technology was impressive, but he was starting to suspect that his recovery rate was faster than they'd expected, based on the way Zyler's compound eyes were tracking his movements. They noticed too. Enhanced assessment? Kaelen asked, pulling on his training uniform. Around the dormitory, the other recruits were pretending to sleep while obviously listening to every word. The crystalline being from day 1 had stopped making distress chiming sounds and was now producing what sounded like the alien equivalent of nervous humming. Command has questions, Zyler said simply. Questions that require answers before today's conditioning session. The security detail escorted Kaelen through corridors he hadn't seen before, deeper into the Citadel's core structure. The architecture here was different, older, more heavily reinforced, with the kind of multiple redundant security systems that suggested whatever lay beyond was considered extremely important or extremely dangerous, possibly both. They stopped at a door that looked like it could withstand a direct nuclear strike, where Zyler placed his hand on a scanner that immediately began running what appeared to be a full biological analysis. After several seconds of lights, beeps, and what sounded like mechanical thinking, the door slid open with the kind of heavy final sound that airlock doors made in movies. After you, Human Vance, Zyler said, and Kaelen couldn't shake the feeling that he was being invited to his own autopsy. The room beyond was part conference chamber, part laboratory, and part something that Kaelen's brain categorized as place where very serious people make very serious decisions about very serious problems. A massive holographic display dominated one wall, currently showing what appear to be star charts, tactical readouts, and data streams that were updating in real time. Around a central table sat what Kaelen assumed were the most important people at the Academy, and possibly in this sector of the galaxy. At the head of the table sat someone who could only be the Academy Commandant. She was tall, elegant, and possessed the kind of presence that suggested she could end civilizations with a strongly worded memo. Her species was unfamiliar to Kaelen, but everything about her posture and bearing screamed apex predator with administrative authority. "Human Vance," she said, her voice carrying the sort of measured calm that Kaelen associated with people who had seen enough violence to understand exactly when it was necessary. "I am Grand Admiral Solara. Please." Kaelen took the indicated chair, noting that every other person in the room was studying him like he was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. The chair had obviously been hastily adjusted for human proportions, which suggested this meeting had been arranged quickly. "Before we proceed," Solara continued, "I want you to understand that nothing you say here will be used against you in any disciplinary action. This is not an interrogation. This is a fact-finding mission, prompted by some unusual developments." "What kind of developments?" Instead of answering directly, Solara gestured to the holographic display. The star charts disappeared, replaced by what appeared to be Academy training records. Kaelen recognized his own biometric data scrolling past, along with performance metrics that looked impressive even to him. "In the past 48 hours, Solara said, you have completed conditioning protocols that typically require weeks of preparation and species-specific modifications. You have sustained injuries that should have required extended medical leave and returned to full function within hours. Most significantly, you have demonstrated pain tolerance and aggressive capability that exceed our baseline data for human physiology by several orders of magnitude." Kaelen considered this. "Is that a problem?" "Depends," Solara said, "on whether you are representative of human military capabilities or whether you are an anomaly." "I'm not sure what you mean." Solara leaned forward slightly, and Kaelen caught a glimpse of what might have been concern in her expression. "Human Vance, what is your military background?" "Terra Defense Force reserves for 2 years after high school. Basic training, some combat exercises, nothing too intense." "And your civilian occupation?" "Construction foreman, mostly demolition and heavy machinery operation." The silence that followed was the kind that preceded very bad news or very expensive decisions. "Human Vance," said a new voice from across the table. Kaelen looked over to see what appeared to be a floating, yellow-skinned jellyfish with cybernetic implants and more eyes than any creature had a right to possess. "I am Chief Intelligence Analyst Sinar. Are you familiar with your species classification in the Galactic Database?" Kerwalel mentioned something about agricultural workers. Specifically, humans are listed as Class 7 carbon-based omnivores, agricultural/industrial specialization, moderate durability, limited combat applications, recommended for non-combat support roles only. Sinar's various eyes focused on Kaelen with disconcerting intensity. "This classification was based on detailed reports from your planetary government regarding human physical and psychological capability." Kaelen blinked. "What kind of reports?" "The kind that emphasized your species' peaceful nature, limited physical resilience, and general unsuitability for military service." Another of Sinar's eyes rotated toward the display, where new data was appearing. "However, your performance suggests that these reports may have been inaccurate or deliberately misleading," added another voice. This came from Vorlag, the green-skinned insectoid, who moved with an unsettling way that suggested he was always calculating attack vectors. "I am Strategic Assessment Director Vorlag. Tell me, Human Vance, how would you describe Terra's approach to military recruitment?" Kaelen thought about it. "Voluntary mostly. People sign up if they want to. There's usually enough volunteers. And those who do not volunteer, they remain in civilian occupations. Yeah, most people just live normal lives, work jobs, raise families, that kind of thing." What percentage of your population has military training? Maybe 5%? Something like that. The silence returned, but this time it felt heavier, more ominous. Human Vance, so Lyra said carefully, if only 5% of your population has military training, and you, with minimal combat experience, can complete our maximum conditioning protocols, what might we expect from your actual warriors? Kaelen had never really thought about it that way. He'd always considered himself pretty average, physically speaking. Sure, he was in good shape from construction work, and he played sports in school, but there were plenty of guys back home who were stronger, faster, tougher, Marines, Special Forces operators, professional fighters. Ah, he said, as the implications sank in. Yeah, you might want to revise that classification. By how much? Vorlag asked, leaning forward with the sort of intensity that suggested this answer was very important. Well, Kaelen said slowly, I'm probably somewhere in the middle, fitness-wise, maybe slightly above average because of the construction work. But we've got Olympic athletes, professional fighters, special operations soldiers. He paused, thinking about some of the guys he'd known in the reserves. Put it this way. If you think I'm tough, you really don't want to meet a Terra Marine. The room erupted into what Kaelen could only describe as controlled panic. Multiple conversations started simultaneously in at least 6 different languages. Data terminals chimed with incoming messages, and someone somewhere was apparently making very urgent comm calls to very important people. Through it all, Lyra remained calm, but Kaelen noticed that her hands had moved to rest on what were obviously weapon controls built into her chair. Human Vance, she said, raising her voice to cut through the noise, I need you to be very specific. Are you telling us that Terra has a significant population of individuals who would exceed your demonstrated capabilities? Significant might be understating it, Kaelen admitted. We got about 8 billion people. Even if only 1% of them are what you'd call serious warriors. He did the math in his head. That's still 80 million people who could probably make your instructors very unhappy. More chaos. Someone dropped a data log. Someone else made a sound that Kaelen's translator couldn't parse, but which definitely conveyed the sentiment of existential dread. Furthermore, Kaelen continued, because he was apparently committed to making everyone's day worse, Terra's been fighting wars pretty much continuously for our entire recorded history. We've gotten really good at it. Define really good, Sinar said, though all of his eyes were now focused on Kaelen with the kind of attention usually reserved for incoming missiles. Well, we've got weapons that can sterilize continents, delivery systems that can put them anywhere on the planet in 30 minutes, and military doctrines based on the assumption that any conflict could escalate to species-ending violence at any moment. Kaelen paused. Plus, we do it all while maintaining the fiction that we're a peaceful civilization that just wants to get along. The room had gone completely silent, except for the sound of what might have been prayers being whispered in several languages. I think, Lyra said very carefully, we may need to contact Terra directly. Probably a good idea, Kaelen agreed, though you might want to be polite about it. We tend to get nervous when heavily armed strangers show up unannounced. Before anyone could respond, the room's communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Commandant, came Karolel's voice, sounding more animated than Kaelen had ever heard him. We have a situation developing in the main training complex. What kind of situation? Lyra asked sharply, her tone suggesting she was bracing for more bad news. Instructor Thrax has requested immediate authorization for lethal force protocols. He wishes to personally test the human's combat capabilities using full Thraxian battle conditioning. No safety restrictions, no medical oversight. Combat to incapacitation or surrender. Kaelen felt a familiar stirring of excitement in his chest. That sounds fun. Every alien in the room turned to stare at him. Fun, Lyra repeated. Well, yeah. I mean, the last 2 days have been interesting, but nobody's really tried to hurt me yet. Not seriously. Kaelen grinned. I'm curious to see what that feels like. Human Vance, Sinar said slowly. Instructor Thrax is the Citadel's primary combat specialist. He has personally trained the elite forces of 17 different species. His conditioning protocols have a 100% success rate in identifying the precise limits of any opponent, and his request for lethal force authorization suggests he intends to discover your limits by potentially killing you. Kaelen considered this. On one hand, that did sound genuinely dangerous. On the other hand, he'd been in dangerous situations before, and he'd always found that the best way to deal with them was to meet them head-on. Besides, he was curious about what his actual limits were. "When do we start?" he asked. The chaos returned, but this time it had a distinctly frantic edge. "Human Vance," Lyra said, raising her voice to cut through the noise. "I cannot authorize lethal force protocols against a trainee. The liability alone." "Actually," Kaelen interrupted, "I'm pretty sure I signed a waiver about that. Big, thick document. Lots of fine print about accepting responsibility for injury or death during training exercises." Lyra consulted her data log, and Kaelen watched her expression shift from concern to resignation. "You did indeed sign such a waiver," she said. "However, then let's do this thing," Kaelen said, standing up from his chair. "Besides, if Thrax is as good as everyone says, it'll be educational. Win or lose, I'll learn something. And if you lose, you may be dead," Vorlag pointed out. "Yeah, but if I win, you'll finally know what humans are actually capable of." Kaelen grinned. "Either way, you get the data you need." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Less panicked, more thoughtful, like a group of very smart people realizing that they were about to witness something that would either answer all their questions or raise entirely new ones. "Very well," Lyra said finally. "Authorization granted for full combat assessment protocols. Medical teams on standby. All senior staff to observe." She looked directly at Kaelen. "Human Vance, are you certain about this?" "Absolutely. Then may your gods help us all," she muttered, touching her communication controls again. "Instructor Kryll, please inform Thrax that his request is approved." And Kryll, "Yes, Commandant. Have the medical bay prepare for multiple trauma cases. I have a feeling we're going to need them." 20 minutes later, Kaelen found himself back in the training bay. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. The space had been cleared of equipment and converted into what could only be described as an arena. Observation galleries that he hadn't noticed before were packed with Academy staff, and the lighting had been adjusted to provide optimal visibility for recording equipment. In the center of it all stood Instructor Thrax. Where Kryll was tall and elegant in his lethality, Thrax was built like a walking siege engine. His red-skinned exoskeleton was thicker, scarred from what appeared to be decades of combat, and configured with additional armor plating that gave him the appearance of someone who had fought wars and won them. His forearms were longer than Kryll's, ending in hands that looked like they could crush steel, and his metallic mandibles were reinforced with what appeared to be adamantine implants. But it was his eyes that caught Kaelen's attention. Where Kryll's eyes held clinical interest and professional focus, Thrax's eyes held something Kaelen recognized from his construction days. The look of someone who had broken things for so long that breaking things had become an art form. "Human Vance," Thrax said, his voice carrying the kind of guttural authority that suggested he'd spent years shouting orders over the sound of gunfire. "I am told you wish to discover your limitations." "That's the plan," Kaelen said, stretching his shoulders and trying to ignore the fact that every person in the observation galleries was staring at him like he was about to attempt something between brave and suicidal. "Excellent." Thrax began moving in a slow circle around Kaelen, studying him from every angle. "I have reviewed recordings of your previous performances. Impressive for a species with limited combat evolution. However, conditioning exercises and actual combat are different disciplines entirely." "How so?" "Conditioning exercises are designed to test specific capabilities under controlled circumstances. Combat is designed to break your opponent by any means necessary." Thrax's mandibles clicked with what sounded like anticipation. "There are no safety protocols in combat. No medical oversight. No extraction procedures. Only victory, defeat, or death." Kaelen felt his pulse quicken, but not with fear. With excitement. This was what he'd been building toward for the past 3 days. Not just surviving alien training exercises, but proving that humans belonged in the same conversation as the galaxy's premier warriors. "Understand," he said. "Do you?" Thrax stopped circling and faced Kaelen directly. "Because once we begin, I will not stop until you are unconscious, surrendered, or incapacitated. I will use every technique at my disposal. I will exploit every weakness I can identify. I will cause you pain that your species may not have words for." "Sounds fair," Kaelen said, and meant it. Thrax's laugh was like the sound of armored vehicles colliding. "Very well. Combat assessment begins in 60 seconds. Use the time to prepare yourself." He moved to one side of the arena and began what appeared to be a warm-up routine that involved movements Kaelen was pretty sure violated several laws of physics. Kaelen used the 60 seconds to do what he always did before a difficult task. He thought about why he was there. Not just at the Citadel. That was simple enough. He'd wanted to see what was out there among the stars, and military service had seemed like a good way to do it. But why he was here, in this moment, facing down an alien warrior who could probably bench press a small building. Because someone needed to show the galaxy what humans could do. Because Terra deserved better than being classified as a population of harmless farmers. Because there were 8 billion people back home who were counting on him to represent their species with dignity and strength. And because if he was being honest with himself, he wanted to know how far he could push before something pushed back hard enough to stop him. "Time," Thrax announced, and the arena fell silent. For a moment, the two of them stood motionless, studying each other across 20 feet of empty space. Kaelen could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching him, recording his every movement, analyzing his chances of survival. Then Thrax moved. The tension is undeniable. Will Kaelen prove humanity's true might? Like this video to show your support, and subscribe so you don't miss the climax of this incredible battle. Kaelen had thought KRYLL was fast. Thrax was faster, not just in terms of raw speed, but in terms of tactical precision. His opening attack came from 4 directions simultaneously, each strike calculated to force Kaelen into a position where the follow-up attacks would be unavoidable. Kaelen dodged left, rolled under the second strike, and came up inside Thrax's guard, just like he had with KRYLL. But this time, Thrax was ready for it. The counter-strike caught Kaelen across the ribs with enough force to lift him off his feet and send him flying across the arena. He hit the wall hard enough to crack the reinforced material, slid down to the floor, and spent several seconds rediscovering how breathing worked. "Adequate reflexes," Thrax observed, walking toward him with the deliberate pace of someone who knew his opponent wasn't going anywhere quickly. "But predictable tactics. You used the same approach that succeeded against Instructor KRYLL." Kaelen pushed himself upright, noting that several of his ribs were making concerning noises, and his left shoulder felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. But he was upright, conscious, and still capable of making poor decisions. "I'm a quick learner," he said, wiping blood from his mouth. "We shall see." Thrax's second attack was completely different from the first. Instead of speed and precision, he used raw power and overwhelming force. All 4 arms struck simultaneously, not trying to be clever about angles or timing, just applying enough violence to solve the problem through brute force application. Kaelen tried to dodge, but Thrax had anticipated that too. The first strike caught him in the stomach, doubling him over. The second got him across the back, driving him to his knees. The third and fourth landed on his shoulders, and Kaelen found himself face down on the arena floor with what felt like a small building sitting on top of him. "Disappointing," Thrax said, though he didn't sound particularly disappointed. "I was led to believe that humans possessed unusual resilience." Kaelen tried to push himself up and discovered that his arms were no longer taking orders from his brain in any reliable fashion. Pain radiated from what felt like every square inch of his body, and his vision was doing interesting things around the edges. But he wasn't unconscious. He hadn't surrendered, and he was definitely not incapacitated. Instead, he was angry. Not the hot, flashing anger that got people into bar fights. The cold, calculating anger that had gotten him through 2 years of Terra Defense Force training with a drill sergeant who thought psychological warfare was a hobby. The anger that had kept him working construction jobs in sub-zero temperatures because his family needed the money. The anger that had carried him through his divorce, his father's death, and every other time life had decided to kick him when he was down. Kaelen Vance had been knocked down before. He'd always gotten back up. And he wasn't about to break that streak for some oversized alien with anger management issues. Not finished yet, he managed to say, and began the slow, agonizing process of getting his feet under him again. Thrax's mandibles stopped clicking. Interesting, the instructor said. You should be unconscious. Sorry to disappoint. Kaelen made it to his knees, then to one foot, then finally to something that might generously be called a standing position. Every movement sent fresh spikes of pain through his nervous system, and he was pretty sure something in his spine was no longer aligned properly. But he was upright. Most impressive, Thrax said, and there was something new in his voice now, something that might have been professional interest. However, durability alone will not be sufficient. The third attack was the worst yet. Thrax didn't just hit Kaelen. He systematically dismantled him. Every strike was precisely placed to cause maximum damage while ensuring he remained conscious to experience it. Ribs cracked, joints separated, blood flowed from cuts that opened faster than Kaelen's alien-enhanced healing could close them. And through it all, Kaelen kept getting back up. Not quickly, not gracefully, but he kept getting up. After the fifth knockdown, something changed in Thrax's approach. The clinical precision remained, but there was something else now, something that looked almost like concern. Human Vance, he said, standing over Kaelen's latest attempt to achieve vertical status. Why do you continue? Kaelen spat blood and managed a grin that was probably more disturbing than intimidating. Because you haven't beaten me yet. I have inflicted injuries that would incapacitate any known species. But I'm still standing. Barely. Still counts. Thrax was quiet for a long moment, studying Kaelen with the same intensity he'd shown at the beginning of the fight, but now there was something different in his expression, something that might have been puzzlement. You cannot win, he said finally. Your species lacks the physical capabilities to match Thraxian combat adaptation. You cannot hurt me significantly, and I can continue this process indefinitely. Maybe, Kaelen admitted, but you can't make me quit. I can kill you. Yeah. But then you wouldn't know what I'm actually capable of. And that was when Kaelen realized something important. Thrax wasn't trying to kill him. He was trying to break him. There was a difference. And that difference was what Kaelen had been waiting for. Because Kaelen Vance had been broken before. By life, by circumstances, by people who should have known better. And every single time, he found a way to put himself back together, stronger than before. More importantly, he learned that sometimes the best way to win wasn't to beat your opponent. Sometimes the best way to win was to refuse to lose until your opponent made a mistake. And Thrax was about to make a mistake. The instructor stepped closer, reaching down to grab Kaelen's shoulders in what was obviously intended to be the final, definitive strike that would end the combat assessment once and for all. Which was when Kaelen bit him. Not the neck this time. Thrax was too smart to expose that vulnerability again. But Thraxian exoskeletons, for all their impressive defensive capabilities, had joints. And joints had soft spots. And Kaelen had spent the last several minutes mapping exactly where those soft spots were located. He lunged forward, inside Thrax's guard, and sank his teeth into the space between the instructor's wrist and forearm armor with every ounce of strength and desperation he had left. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. Thrax's roar of surprise and pain echoed through the arena like a sonic weapon. His other three arms flailed wildly, trying to dislodge Kaelen without causing further damage to his compromised limb. For the first time since the combat began, the instructor was reacting instead of acting. Kaelen held on with the tenacity of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to prove. His teeth found purchase in whatever passed for Thraxian blood vessels, and he bit down with the same determination that had gotten him through every challenge in his life. Fascinating, he heard someone say from the observation galleries, though it sounded like it was coming from very far away. The human appears to be attempting to sever major circulatory pathways. Is that a viable combat technique for a species? came another voice. Unknown. We have no baseline data for human desperation protocols. Kaelen tuned out the commentary and focused on the simple equation of pressure versus resistance. He was going to hold on until Thrax either surrendered, fell unconscious, or found a way to kill him that didn't involve the use of the arm Kaelen was currently destroying. Unfortunately, Thrax chose option 4, something Kaelen hadn't considered. The instructor's exoskeleton began to heat up, just like RLL's had. But this time it didn't stop at painful. It kept climbing toward temperatures that would have been lethal for most carbon-based life forms. Kaelen's mouth filled with the taste of superheated alien ichor. His lips began to blister, and the pain became so intense that his vision went white around the edges. But he'd felt worse. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. And pain was pain. More importantly, he could feel Thrax's strength beginning to flag. Whatever Kaelen was doing to the instructor's circulatory system was working. The heat was a desperate countermeasure, which meant Thrax was running out of options, which meant Kaelen was winning. He held on for another 30 seconds that felt like 30 hours, until finally, impossibly, he felt Thrax begin to sway. Enough! Came a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Medical intervention authorized. Separate the combatants immediately. Kaelen felt something that might have been a neural disruptor hit him, and his muscles finally stopped taking orders from his brain. He released his grip on Thrax's arm and collapsed to the arena floor, his body finally admitting that it had been pushed past its operational limits. But he was conscious. He was breathing. And unless he was hallucinating, Instructor Thrax was sitting down heavily against the arena wall, cradling his injured arm and looking at Kaelen with an expression that suggested he was seeing something that shouldn't have been possible. Human Vance, Thrax said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. That was educational. Kaelen tried to respond, but his vocal cords seemed to have joined the rest of his body in filing a formal complaint about recent working conditions. Instead, he managed what might have been a thumbs-up gesture, though it was possible he was just twitching. Medical teams to the arena floor. So Lyra's voice came over the communication system. Priority treatment for both combatants. And someone get me a direct communication link to Terra. We need to have a conversation with this human's government. As the medical teams descended on the arena like a swarm of very well-trained insects, Kaelen heard Thrax say something that made him smile, despite the fact that smiling hurt. Commandant, the instructor said, I believe we may need to revise our tactical assessments regarding human combat capabilities. By how much? Solara's voice asked. Thrax was quiet for a long moment, studying Kaelen with the same intensity he'd shown throughout the fight. All of them, he said finally. We may need to revise all of them. The implications are galactic, and Kaelen Vance is just getting started. What do you think this means for Terra and the universe? Share your predictions in the comments, and subscribe to join us as this groundbreaking story unfolds. Kaelen closed his eyes as the medical equipment began working on his various injuries, but he couldn't stop smiling. Kaelen Vance woke up to the sound of arguing. Not the heated, emotional kind of arguing that broke out in construction site trailers when someone forgot to order the right materials. This was the cold, clinical arguing of people who were trying to solve a problem that had no good solutions, and every option on the table ranged from diplomatically catastrophic to species-endingly stupid. He kept his eyes closed and listened. We cannot simply pretend the last 3 days did not happen, someone was saying in a voice that sounded like Grand Admiral Lyra. The human's performance has invalidated 40% of our strategic assessments. The performance of one individual, came another voice. Kaelen thought it might be Sinar, the floating jellyfish with too many eyes. We cannot extrapolate species-wide capabilities from a single data point. Can't we? This was a new voice, guttural and familiar. Thrax. I have personally assessed the combat potential of representatives from 237 different species. Never, not once, has a trainee inflicted actual damage during a conditioning exercise. The human bit you, said what sounded like Vorlag, the green insectoid. That is hardly sophisticated combat technique. The human identified the precise vulnerabilities in Thraxian exoskeleton design and exploited them using available resources while under extreme duress, Thrax corrected. That is exactly sophisticated combat technique. It simply appears primitive because we're not accustomed to thinking of biological weapons as standard military equipment. Kaelen had to admit that biological weapons was a new way to describe teeth, but he supposed it was accurate. Furthermore, Thrax continued, preliminary analysis of the bite pattern suggests deliberate targeting of major circulatory pathways. Either this human possesses intuitive knowledge of alien anatomy, or his species has evolved predatory instincts that our classification system failed to identify. Predatory instincts. Solara's voice carried a note of concern that Kaelen found oddly satisfying. Consider the behavioral patterns, Thrax said, and Kaelen could practically hear him warming to his subject. Immediate aggressive response to superior force. Escalating violence when faced with escalating violence. Refusal to submit despite overwhelming physical disadvantage. Tactical adaptation under extreme stress. And most significantly, apparent enjoyment of combat situations that should trigger survival withdrawal responses. I am suggesting that humans are an apex predator species that has learned to masquerade as agricultural omnivores. The question is whether this masquerade is intentional or unconscious. The room fell quiet for a moment, and Kaelen decided it was probably time to announce that he was awake before they started planning his autopsy. It's intentional, he said, opening his eyes and sitting up slowly. His body felt remarkably good considering yesterday's activities. Alien medical technology was impressive. But the sudden silence in the room suggested his words had caused some distress. He was in what appeared to be a private medical suite, surrounded by the same collection of Academy officials who had been present for yesterday's pre-combat briefing. But now they were all staring at him with expressions that ranged from fascination to mild horror. Elaborate, Solara said carefully. Kaelen stretched, noting with approval that nothing hurt anymore. We learned a long time ago that being seen as dangerous makes people nervous. Nervous people make poor trading partners and problematic neighbors. So we present ourselves as peaceful farmers who just want to get along. But you're not peaceful farmers, Sinar observed, all of his eyes focusing on Kaelen with laser intensity. Some of us are. Most of us, actually. But peaceful doesn't mean harmless. Kaelen swung his legs over the side of the medical bed, feeling remarkably refreshed. We just gotten really good at not looking threatening until we need to be. And when do you need to be? Vorlag asked. Kaelen thought about history classes, news reports, and conversations with his grandfather who'd served in 3 different wars. When someone threatens our families. When someone threatens our homes. When someone threatens our freedom. He paused. Or when someone assumes we're easy targets because we're polite. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Heavier, like the moment when everyone in a room realizes they've been making a very serious mistake for a very long time. Human Vance, Solara said slowly. Yesterday's combat assessment suggests that you personally could pose a significant threat to Citadel security if you chose to become hostile. Probably, Kaelen agreed. But I'm not hostile. I'm here because I want to be here. I volunteered for this. But if your circumstances changed, if Terra's relationship with the galactic community became strained. Kaelen considered this question carefully because he could see where it was leading, and he wanted to give an honest answer that wouldn't cause a diplomatic incident. If someone threatened Terra, he said finally, if someone attacked my home, my family, my people, he met Solara's gaze directly. Then you'd find out what humans are actually capable of when we stop being polite. More silence. Kaelen was beginning to think that causing awkward silences was his superpower. How many others like you are there? Thrax asked quietly. Like me? I'm pretty average, honestly. Maybe slightly above median for physical conditioning because of the construction work, but nothing special. Kaelen scratched his head, thinking about the people he'd known throughout his life. We've got Olympic athletes who could probably complete your entire conditioning program as a warm-up exercise. Special forces operators who've been trained specifically for impossible situations. Professional fighters who've dedicated their lives to perfecting violence as an art form. And how many of these individuals does Terra possess? Well, there are about 8 billion of us total. Maybe 100 million who've had serious military training. Another 100 million in law enforcement, emergency services, professional athletics, people whose jobs require physical capability and stress tolerance. Kaelen did some rough math in his head. Then you've got maybe another billion or so who are just naturally tough, because that's what life requires. Construction workers, farmers, anyone who works with their hands in dangerous conditions. The room had gone completely silent, except for the sound of someone making what might have been prayers, or possibly just very concerned statistical calculations. So, roughly 15% of your population could potentially match or exceed your demonstrated capabilities? So Lyra asked, though her voice suggested she already knew she wasn't going to like the answer. Conservatively, yeah, though some of them would probably make me look like a kindergartner. Kaelen grinned. My little sister's high school wrestling team could probably give your instructors some interesting challenges. Before anyone could respond to this latest revelation, the room's communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Commandant, came Carwell's voice, sounding more animated than Kaelen had ever heard him. We have a situation developing in the main training complex. What kind of situation? Solara asked, though her tone suggested she was bracing for more bad news. The remaining trainees have requested permission to attempt the maximum conditioning protocols. All of them. Simultaneously. Kaelen felt a stir of pride. The other recruits had been watching his progress, and apparently they decided they didn't want to be shown up by the human. Denied, Solara said immediately. Those protocols are designed for individual assessment only. But with respect, Commandant, they are threatening to file formal complaints with their planetary governments if we don't provide them with training opportunities equivalent to what the human has received. They want to attempt protocols that nearly killed them on day one. They want to attempt protocols that the human completed while suffering from multiple traumatic injuries. KRYLL corrected. Apparently, being outperformed by what they were told was a moderate durability agricultural species has caused significant psychological distress. Kaelen couldn't help but smile. He'd been in enough competitive situations to recognize the dynamic at play. Nobody wanted to be the person who got shown up by someone who was supposedly inferior. Furthermore, KRYLL continued, we've received communication requests from 17 different species who want to send additional recruits for academy training. Word has apparently spread regarding the human's performance. What kind of word? Solara asked, though she sounded like she already knew she wasn't going to like this answer either. The kind where various governments are beginning to question whether their existing military assessments regarding human capabilities might be incomplete. More silence. Kaelen was definitely developing a reputation for causing these. Sir, came another voice over the communication system. Kaelen thought it might be one of the junior instructors. We also have 14 different research institutions requesting permission to conduct detailed studies of human physiology, psychology, and training methodologies. Solara prompted. And 3 different military contractors asking about licensing agreements for human-directed combat enhancement techniques, such as controlled aggression conditioning, pain tolerance conditioning, and something called motivational psychological warfare, based on analysis of the human's verbal responses during combat. Kaelen raised an eyebrow. Motivational psychological warfare? Your tendency to engage in casual conversation during life-threatening situations appears to have significant psychological impact on opponents, Thrax explained. Several analysts have suggested it could be developed into a formal tactical doctrine. I just like to stay relaxed during stressful situations, Kaelen said. Yes, Thrax said dryly. That is precisely what makes it psychologically disturbing to your opponents. Before the conversation could continue, the room's main display activated, showing an incoming communication request from what appeared to be a very official source. The symbol that appeared was one Kaelen didn't recognize, but every alien in the room immediately straightened to attention. Galactic Security Council, Solara said, her voice taking on the sort of formal tone that suggested this was very important. Accept communication. The display shifted to show what appeared to be a conference chamber filled with representatives from dozens of different species. Kaelen recognized some of them from Academy briefing materials. Major galactic powers, military leaders, diplomatic officials. The kind of people who made decisions that affected entire star systems. Commandant Solara, said a voice that somehow managed to sound authoritative in several different ways simultaneously. We understand you have a situation requiring immediate assessment. Is this correct, Council Leader Zephyra? It is, Council Leader Arion. We have discovered significant discrepancies in the galactic database regarding human military capabilities. Elaborate. Solara gestured toward Kaelen, who suddenly felt like he was on display in a very expensive zoo. This individual, representing baseline human capabilities, has completed conditioning protocols that exceed our projections by several orders of magnitude. Furthermore, he indicates that he is representative of median human potential rather than exceptional. Show us, came another voice from the council chamber. What followed was the most embarrassing 15 minutes of Kaelen's life, as the Academy's recording equipment displayed every moment of his 3-day performance for an audience of the galaxy's most important people. The broken nose, the electrical maze, the gravity field, and finally, the combat assessment that had ended with him biting chunks out of an instructor who is supposedly one of the most dangerous individuals in known space. When the recordings ended, the silence from the council chamber was absolute. Human Vance, Council Leader Arion, said finally, "Are you willing to answer questions regarding your species' military capabilities?" "Sure," Kaelen said, though he was beginning to suspect that his answers were going to cause more diplomatic problems than they solved. If Terra were to face a military threat, how would your species respond? Kaelen thought about history, about the stories his grandfather had told him, about the news reports he'd seen throughout his life. Depend on the threat. If someone attacked our civilian population, we'd probably mobilize everything we had and keep fighting until the threat was eliminated. Or we were. Everything. Every person capable of holding a weapon, every piece of military equipment, every tactical doctrine we've developed over thousands of years of warfare. Kaelen paused. We've had a lot of practice at fighting for survival. And if the threat were external, from outside your solar system? Kaelen felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what the council leader was really asking. Are you asking what would happen if an alien species attacked Terra? Hypothetically, Kaelen thought about science fiction movies, about humanity's general reaction to existential threats, about the way his own species had responded to every challenge throughout history. If aliens attacked Terra, he said slowly, then you'd find out why we spent the last 50,000 years getting really, really good at killing things that threaten us. He met the council leader's gaze directly through the communication link, and we wouldn't stop until the threat was eliminated. All of it. The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. Human Vance, Arion said finally, would you be willing to serve as a liaison between Terra and the Galactic Security Council to help us develop more accurate assessments of human capabilities and intentions? Kaelen considered this. On one hand, it sounded like a significant responsibility that he probably wasn't qualified for. On the other hand, someone needed to make sure the galaxy understood that humans weren't agricultural weaklings, and apparently that someone was going to be him. I'll do it, he said, but I have some conditions. Such as, first, Terra gets full membership in the galactic community. No more agricultural species with limited applications nonsense. We're players, and we want to be treated like players. Acceptable. Second, any military assessments of human capabilities get reviewed by actual humans before they're finalized. We're tired of being underestimated. Also acceptable. Third, Kaelen said, grinning, I want to finish the academy program. All of it. I came here to learn what the galaxy's best military training had to offer, and I'm not leaving until I've completed every course you've got. From somewhere in the council chamber came what sounded like nervous laughter. Human Vance, Arion said, given your performance thus far, I believe completion of the academy program may require significant modifications to our existing curriculum. Then modify it, Kaelen said. Make it harder. Make it more challenging. I want to know what I'm actually capable of. And apparently, the only way to find that out is to keep pushing until something pushes back hard enough to stop me. The communication link went quiet for several minutes as the council members had what appeared to be a very intense discussion in languages Kaelen couldn't understand. Finally, Arion returned. Very well, Human Vance. You will complete the Academy program using modified protocols designed specifically for human capabilities. Upon graduation, you will serve as Terra's first official liaison to the Galactic Security Council. There was a pause. May your gods help us all. As the communication link closed, Kaelen became aware that everyone in the medical suite was staring at him again. Well, Lyra said finally, I believe we need to completely restructure the Academy's training protocols. How so? Kaelen asked. Because if you represent baseline human capability, then our existing programs are clearly inadequate for properly conditioning your species. Thrax's mandibles resumed their familiar clicking. We will need to develop new methodologies. Harder conditioning. More challenging scenarios. More dangerous. More dangerous? Kaelen asked hopefully. Significantly more dangerous. Kaelen grinned. When do we start? The laughter that followed had a distinctly hysterical edge to it. Human Vance, Carawell's voice came over the communication system. Please report to Training Base 7 for advanced protocol briefing. And Vance? You might want to say goodbye to the other trainees first. Why? Because after today, you'll be training in facilities that most of them will never be cleared to see. As Kaelen walked through the Academy corridors toward what would apparently be his new and significantly more dangerous training regimen, he passed the main training bay where the remaining recruits were attempting their own versions of the conditioning protocols he'd completed. They looked determined, focused, and absolutely terrified, but they were trying. They were pushing themselves beyond what they thought possible because a human from a supposedly peaceful agricultural world had shown them what was actually achievable. Kaelen smiled as he continued toward Training Base 7. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of aliens discovering their own hidden capabilities, pushing past barriers they'd assumed were absolute. 3 months later, Kaelen Vance graduated from the Zenith Citadel. He carried Instructor Thrax's spine. Not literally, that would have been murder, and murder was generally frowned upon, even in advanced military training. But figuratively, in the sense that Thrax had finally met someone who could consistently push him past his own breaking point and into territory that required the invention of entirely new conditioning protocols. The graduation ceremony was attended by representatives from 47 different species, 12 different military organizations, and at least 6 research institutions that wanted to study human training methodologies for potential application to their own forces. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished entities, Grand Admiral Lyra announced to the assembled crowd, her voice echoing through the Grand Hall. I present Citadel graduate Vance Kaelen, first human to complete the advanced conditioning protocol, holder of 7 Academy records, and the individual responsible for the most significant revision of galactic military assessments in recorded history. The applause was polite but nervous, as if the audience wasn't entirely sure whether they should be celebrating or preparing for evacuation. Kaelen stood at attention in his dress uniform, noting with satisfaction that it bore the insignia of someone who had officially completed every challenge the galaxy's finest military minds could devise. Behind him, Instructor Thrax, who had become something approaching a friend over the past 3 months, was grinning in the way that Thraxian grinned when they were genuinely pleased with someone's performance. Graduate Vance, Lyra continued. Do you have any final words for your fellow Academy graduates? Kaelen looked out at the audience, taking in the faces staring back at him. Some looked impressed, some looked concerned. A few looked like they were already composing reports that were going to cause some very interesting conversations in very important offices across the galaxy. Just one thing, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ceremony hall. When you're putting together your threat assessments and military projections, remember that I'm not special. I'm not the strongest human, or the fastest, or the smartest, or the toughest. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm just the first one who came out here to see what you were all about. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded either very good news or very bad news. But I won't be the last, Kaelen continued, grinning. Terra's got 8 billion people, and a lot of them are going to be very interested to hear about the opportunities available out here among the stars. The applause was polite but nervous, as if the audience wasn't entirely sure whether they should be celebrating or preparing for evacuation. Kaelen stood at attention in his dress uniform, noting with satisfaction that it bore the insignia of someone who had officially completed every challenge the galaxy's finest military minds could devise. Behind him, Instructor Thrax, who had become something approaching a friend over the past 3 months, was grinning in the way that Thraxian grinned when they were genuinely pleased with someone's performance. Graduate Vance, so Lyra continued, do you have any final words for your fellow Academy graduates? Kaelen looked out at the audience, taking in the faces staring back at him. Some looked impressed, some looked concerned. A few looked like they were already composing reports that were going to cause some very interesting conversations in very important offices across the galaxy. Just one thing, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ceremony hall. When you're putting together your threat assessments and military projections, remember that I'm not special. I'm not the strongest human, or the fastest, or the smartest, or the toughest. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm just the first one who came out here to see what you were all about. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded either very good news or very bad news. But I won't be the last, Kaelen continued, grinning. Terra's got 8 billion people, and a lot of them are going to be very interested to hear about the opportunities available out here among the stars.